Okay.
Okay, cool.
Your voice, your vote. Welcome to the Los Angeles County District Attorney Candidate Forum. And now from ABC 7 Eyewitness News, your host, Mark Brown.
Good evening. We are in the historic Grand Central Air Terminal in Glendale for the Los Angeles County District Attorney Candidate Forum. I am Mark Brown. I'll be your moderator of this ABC 7 event, co-sponsored by the League of Women Voters of Greater Los Angeles. Univision LA is our media partner for this event. The Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office is the largest prosecutorial office in the country, and the two candidates vying to run this crucial office join us tonight. They are the incumbent District Attorney George Gascon and Nathan Hochman, a former federal prosecutor and U.S. Assistant Attorney General. Joining me tonight as panelists for this event is Gabriela Tessier from Univision LA and ABC7 reporter Josh Haskell. Each candidate will have 1 minute to answer each question and 1 minute for a closing statement. These times may be modified as needed. I will have the option to continue or extend or discontinue the discussion on a particular issue if the dialogue so warrants. Now, during this forum, any attacks of a personal nature, including private matters having no bearing on a candidate's ability to perform the duties of the office, will not be tolerated. If a candidate makes a personal attack, I'll use my discretion to interrupt that candidate and give the other candidate a chance to respond in that case. Now, this forum is scheduled for 1 hour. We're going to take a break about halfway through, a break of 1 minute. We will begin now with a question for Mr. Hochman, and it is a question about violent crime. Data from the California Department of Justice shows violent crime in Los Angeles County has increased 8.5% from 2019 to 2023. Over that same 5-year period, the LAPD data shows a 5.6% increase in violent crime. We're talking about homicide, rape, robbery, and aggravated assault. If you are elected, what would you do to address the increase in violent crime? What tools would you use as DA to address it, Mr. Hochman?
Thank you for the question. So what I would do is I would eliminate extreme policies, and Mr. Gascon has implemented an extreme decarceration policy that says that certain violent criminals will not be prosecuted to the full extent of the law in the first place, and they'll be let out before they serve their full sentences at the end of the process. What I reject decarceration policies and extreme mass incarceration policies. What I do is I come down at the middle. The middle is where even balanced prosecutors have always come down. And I call it actually the hard middle, because you got to do the work. You got to go look at each case individually, look at each defendant and their criminal background. Go ahead and also look at the crime committed and the impact on the victim to determine who the true threats are to our public safety, often repeat offenders and need to be behind bars, and the ones that aren't. Your first-time nonviolent offender can very well serve their debt to society through community service, a restitution, pay it back if you stole something, or a diversion program if you have a serious drug addiction.
Mr. Gascon, violent crime.
You know, I've spent my entire 40-year career grappling with crime stats since I was with the LAPD. During COVID, we had increases in crime, but the good news is that violent crime is down nationally and it's down locally, and that includes homicides. The bad news is that we know that some property crimes are up. Car thefts are up. These are not my numbers. These are the numbers from the FBI, the LAPD, and the Sheriff Department. Now, I recognize that while violent crime is down, fear is up, and I know people in our community, they often do not feel safe. Because the reality is that if a loved one is murdered, it doesn't matter that the murder rate is down. The murder rate just went up for you 100%. That's why I've taken an aggressive approach to prosecuting violent crime. My office prosecutes at the same rates as we have for the last 10 years when it comes to that, and we continue to hold people accountable. My ironclad promise has always been, and will continue to be, that I will do everything that I can in order to keep our community safe.
Gabriela Tessier, your question for Mr. Gascon.
Good evening, gentlemen. People we encounter in the community who are victims or witnesses to crime say there is no use in reporting the abuses or attacks they witness or suffer, because even if an arrest is made, the person responsible will not be held accountable. If elected, how would you get Angelenos to feel they can trust the law will be served and that the law will be on their side and not the criminal side?
Right. So, you know, the way our system works, of course, is that the police has to make an arrest, and then that case gets presented to the prosecutor. When you look at our work for the last almost 4 years now, we have prosecuted over 100,000 serious and violent crimes. That is the rate comparable to the last 10 years in the office. We have addressed things like organized retail theft. You know, I think as a profession, and I'm talking about police and prosecutors, we were caught flat-footed for a while, but our organized retail theft is down now. We have been very aggressive on dealing with things like hate crimes, human trafficking, wage theft, and we will continue to do that work. And my commitment has always been that we will work hard to ensure the safety of our community.
Mr. Hochman.
Yes, what I think you've heard, both in this answer and the prior answer, is Mr. Gascon gaslighting the public. He was asked originally the question about the California Department of Justice statistics. Those are countywide statistics. His response came back with LA City, one of the 88 cities in the county. And the countywide statistics by the California Department of Justice reflect the concern emanating from your question, that people feel that injustice is actually occurring because violent crimes are up double digits, property crimes are up double digits, hate crimes are up double digits, shoplifting is up a whopping 133%, and that shoplifting is actually being reported. Fentanyl crimes are up double digits. It's going to kill more 18 to 35-year-olds on his watch than anything else out there. Again, we need to go ahead and go ahead and not only focus on the statistics, but focus on people's individual experiences. And those individual experiences mean that people's eyes don't lie, but Mr. Gascon does.
Mr. Gascon?
You know, my opponent, in a very Trumpish way, continues to use slogans and, you know, calling names. When he was running as a Republican in 2020, for the California Attorney General, he talked about a spiral of lawlessness. Now he talks about the golden age of criminals, and now he's going into name calling. The reality is that Mr. Hawkins does not understand the work. He doesn't understand juvenile law. Apparently in a recent interview, he indicated he really doesn't understand how 95% or so our work is, which is dealing with plea bargaining. He continues to attack rather than come up with solutions to any of our work. This is a complex space, and we're always dealing with the complexities of the work. But much like we see on the national level, where see people name calling and obfuscating, I see my opponent continuing to do that instead of showing what he will do that is different and new that will make a difference.
All right, really quick, I'm going to give you 1 minute, and then we're going to get to the next question. Mr. Hochman.
Yes. Mr. Gascon is not going to run on his experience because he literally has never personally prosecuted or defended a single criminal case in his life. That's a zero. I have 34 years of criminal justice experience as a prosecutor and a defense attorney. That's 34 in my column. He's not going to run on his record of public safety because it's a record of public safety failure. Instead, what he's going to try and do is divide us. He's going to say this is a Democrat versus a former Republican, but let me set the record straight. I was a Democrat for the first 20 years of my life, and then I was a Republican for the next 20. Now I'm running as an independent because that's exactly how I'm going to run the office, independent of politics, unlike the personal political agenda of Mr. Gascon. And what he also isn't telling people, again, gaslighting him, is that he's been a Republican in his life almost twice as long as I have, and I've been a Democrat in my life almost twice as long as he has. That shows both the irrelevancy, the idiocy, and the desperate plea of him to use politics instead of what will keep people safe.
Josh, your question for Mr. Hochman.
Yeah, Nathan Hochman. Proposition 36 is on the California ballot this November. If passed, it would reclassify some misdemeanor theft and drug crimes as felonies, and a person charged could choose to go into treatment instead of prison. Governor Newsom and Attorney General Rob Bonta are against Proposition 36, saying that it'll take us back to the 1980s, the war on drugs. But a recent poll by the Public Policy Institute of California found 71% of Californians plan to vote yes. Here in LA County, also, that number is the exact same, 71%. What is your position on Proposition 36?
My position is to support it, and here's why. Proposition 47 was co-authored by Mr. Gascon as the Safe Neighborhoods and Schools Act, a Gascon if there ever was one. Because here's what his grand plan was, to turn felony into misdemeanor theft and do the same thing with drug use, meth, heroin, fentanyl drug use. Then become district attorney and say we're not prosecuting misdemeanors at all, effectively decriminalizing those types of thefts and those types of drug use, and he has succeeded. by instructing on his first day, first hour, first email, all 750 of his prosecutors not to prosecute these type of crimes. What I would do differently is use Proposition 36, which is going after repeat offenders, because you have to be convicted 3 times, whether it's drug use, 3 times, whether it's theft, before the 3rd time becomes either felony eligible and a court can put you in prison, or with the drug use, a court can offer you that alternative of treatment. So I think it gives additional tools to a prosecutor, but not Mr. Gascon, who won't use them at all.
Mr. Gascon, your position on Prop 36.
Yes. Mr. Holcomb likes to talk about hard middle, which is really code word for basically going back to the days of mass incarceration, the death penalty, sending 16-year-olds to adult prison. And he's supporting Prop 36, very much using the same approach. The reality is that Prop 47 brought over $100 million a year to services such as drug treatment, intervention. Under Prop 36, that money will go away. The theft crimes that Prop 47 had problems with have been cured by legislation from the governor and the legislature. But I'm fearful that Prop 36 is promising to have drug treatment when it doesn't bring any treatment money to have treatment. And I believe, especially with someone like Mr. Holcomb, that we'll go back to this. We had about 40,000 people in California State Prison, mostly black and brown, for simple use of drugs.
Is that a yes or a no on Prop 36?
That is a no on 36.
No on 36. Gabriela, your question for Mr. Gascon.
Something was said earlier about retail theft. A 2023 report by the National Retail Federation identified Los Angeles as the city with the worst organized retail crime in the country for several years in a row. So there are plenty of videos showing groups of people robbing stores while destroying property. For example, we have seen stores lock up their goods in glass in cases. And there's a well-known example of a Rite Aid store in Compton of that. And also a ceviche place in Culver City, closed after 4 times of robberies and attacks just in a couple of months. So in your view, what needs to be done to stop these reoccurring crimes and keep businesses safe? Mr. Gascon first.
Yeah, so we saw organized retail theft increase during the pandemic nationwide, and our community was the same. We also heard the same issues that were being brought up by retailers, and that concern resulted in a variety of task forces that were put together by the LAPD, the Sheriff's Department, the CHP, and others. We actually funnel all those cases through our organized crime division. We have prosecuted over 11,000 cases involving the area of retail theft, about 1,500 that are directly ORT. But in addition to the prosecutions that some have led anywhere from jail time to prison time, we have also worked with the California legislation to create legislation that address the areas that we needed to see improvement on in how to deal with repeat offenders. The reality is that organized retail theft is much more complex, and even retailers will often tell you that they don't have a way to distinguish between inventory shrinkage and that is being stolen from shoplifters.
Mr. Hochman, retail theft.
Yes, I had a chance to speak to over 100 7-Eleven franchisee owners, and they told me that with each franchise, they have put their life savings into these franchises. And they have said that at this point, they don't even report the type of theft that goes on there, because they used to report it, and the police would say, look, Gascon doesn't prosecute, so why are we even taking the report? Now they don't even prosecute, they don't even give the report to the police. And I asked them, well, why don't you at least want an insurance claim? They said, look, the insurance policy deductible would eat up the entire loss, and if we even filed it, our insurance policy would be canceled. Those folks look at me, I look at them, and they say, you got to do something. You got to get rid of this Gascon, who's implemented policies that have sent a message emboldening criminals to go ahead and engage in this type of theft, knowing that even if they get arrested, they'll be arrested in the morning and out by the afternoon. So again, we can change those policies by holding people proportionally and smartly accountable with a hard middle approach.
How do you do that?
The way you do it is you do it in several ways. So for instance, let's start with juveniles who steal just under $950. Right now, Mr. Gascon has a blanket policy. He says under no circumstances will that juvenile be prosecuted for doing it. And by the way, that is a problem that parents are facing, because parents are trying to teach their kids the difference between right and wrong, and then stealing has consequences. And Mr. Gascon's own policies say no. You can go ahead and steal, there are no consequences. So we can, again, bring back those smart policies, and we're not going to put them in prison, but we are going to institute community service, restitution, pay it back, or if they do have a drug addiction and we're stealing for that reason, give them the choice. You can go through a diversion program, or you can go to jail. And that diversion program, that rehab program that used to work, we used to graduate hundreds of people through drug court, through an 18-month rehab program, has been gutted by Mr. Gascon's policies.
Mr. Gascon, I'll give you a minute to respond.
Sure. My opponent has a disconnection with the truth, and he also has a failure to understand California law, especially as it relates to juveniles. The reality is that juveniles do not get a free pass. They get prosecuted under the juvenile system, and they're held accountable for their crimes when they get caught and they're arrested by the police. However, the juvenile laws are very complex, and I understand that my opponent has never prosecuted a juvenile case, nor has ever worked on having to file a juvenile case. But the reality is that the system for juveniles is very, very different. First of all, a lot of the information is not shared publicly. Secondly, there is a presumption of rehabilitation on the work. And thirdly, when we're looking at juveniles, we're always looking also at who are the adults that are involved in the case, and are there other people that should be held accountable for this case. But again, I understand that my opponent is completely disconnected from reality and doesn't understand the law often when it comes to state law.
Josh, your question for Mr. Hochman.
Yeah, Nathan Hochman. The war between Israel and Hamas sparked protests in LA County earlier this year. At UCLA, an encampment occupied a portion of campus for 8 days. It ended in a violent clash. In the role of district attorney, how do you draw the line between free speech, a hate crime, and the safety of those trying to get an education during this chaotic time?
So I'm a big supporter of the First Amendment. And if people want to go in front of the federal building on Wilshire and say what I would consider to be vile and reprehensible things, not only do they have a right to do it, but I will protect that right. But when words turn into illegal conduct, when they go ahead and shut down a freeway, when they go ahead and shut down LAX, when they go ahead and defile and vandalize a college campus and prevent students from actually getting the education that they're there for, or when they engage in violent acts against Jews, or for that matter, any minorities. In this case, it was in front of a synagogue in Pico Robertson. They're going to go to jail. They're going to be held accountable. And the DA needs to say that up front, proactively, here are the laws, here are the real consequences, and if you want to go ahead and violate the laws, those consequences will be real. Mr. Gascon, unlike Mayor Bass, who said those acts in front of that synagogue were abhorrent, Gavin Newsom said that they were completely unacceptable. Mr. Gascon, silence.
Mr. Gascon.
Silence.
You know, my opponent, again, continues to be disconnected from reality. In the city of LA, which includes UCLA and USC, misdemeanors are prosecuted by the city attorney's office. We do felonies. Every felony has been presented concerning on-campus violence during the protest has been looked, and they have been filed. Cases where we have misdemeanor jurisdiction, like in the case of the Claremont colleges, we have prosecuted those misdemeanors as well. You know, the political rhetoric and the fear-mongering that my opponent continues to espouse, quite frankly, is not dignified of the job. If you look at the way that we have addressed the issues of campus violence, protecting the First Amendment, holding those accountable that are committing those crimes that we have jurisdiction over where the police is making arrests, are very solid, and the numbers are unassailable.
Gabriela, your question for Mr. Gascon.
The murder of General Hospital actor Johnny Wachter shook Angelenos. Police say the alleged gunman and others arrested for Wachter's murder are affiliated with the violent gang Florencia 13. Wachter's family said they were very pleased with the arrests made in this case, but they were disappointed no gang enhancements were filed against them. Can you explain your position on this? Why and when should gang enhancements be applied?
So obviously, this is a horrendous case, and my heart goes out to the victims, family, and the community that was impacted by this. This is a case that we work closely with the LAPD to help in the investigation to ensure that search warrants were conducted and that the arrests were made. This case, as other serious cases, go through a special committee that looks at the cases to determine whether we would seek special circumstances, which we did in this case, which means that if the assailant is found guilty, he would do life without the possibility of parole. Again, horrible case. We worked from the very beginning with the LAPD, and we will continue to work through this case to ensure that the case is prosecuted appropriately.
Mr. Hochman.
So Mr. Gascon didn't answer your question. Your question is when the gang enhancement should be imposed. And the reason he didn't answer that question is he has a blanket policy. And in the entire 3.5 years he has been DA, he has never imposed the gang enhancement. Now, this is an enhancement that the state legislature has been put on the books over 25 years ago when it said it was going to address the crisis of criminal gangs terrorizing communities. And Mr. Gascon, again, he swore to uphold the law, but he didn't tell everybody there was an asterisk or he was crossing his fingers when he did it, and that there were certain laws he was not going to implement. Mr. Gascon has been one of the greatest gifts for gangs that gangs could possibly have received. Because in all those situations where gangs have engaged in violent criminal conduct, and it's been motivated by their gang participation, Mr. Gascon over and over and over again refuses to stand with the victims and has stood with the gangs.
Josh, your question for Mr. Hochman.
Yes, in your view, what is the LA County District Attorney's Office responsibility to victims of crime? Should prosecutors attend parole hearings with victims who may not want to see a prisoner who harmed them released?
The LADA's office, traditionally for decades, has been the champion of victims. And the parole situation's a perfect example. First day, first hour, first email. Mr. Gascon, for the first time in decades, banned prosecutors from going with victim families who had suffered a son or a daughter or a parent who was murdered when they're confronting the murderer who has their own counsel at a parole hearing where they're trying to get out of prison early. Now, the prosecutor gets unique access to the information being considered by the parole board to make the best arguments on behalf of the victim family. Why Mr. Gascon would do this? It's a great question. I mean, it's completely consistent with his pro-criminal, anti-victim philosophy. And it is, and again, to show you how it is reverberated against him, two of the people endorsing me are Max and Rory Kennedy. Max and Rory Kennedy are the sons of Robert F. Kennedy, who actually was slain by Sirhan Sirhan. Mr. Gascon refused to send a prosecutor to the parole hearing, and Sirhan Sirhan was granted parole for the first time, and it took Governor Newsom to intervene, reverse that grant of parole, and put Sirhan Sirhan back behind bars.
Mr. Gascon.
You know, what is undoubtedly truth is that if Mr. Hochman were to be the district attorney, we will go back to the age of mass incarceration. Let's break down the parole system. First of all, parole is not about re-prosecuting the case that caused a person to go to prison. Parole is a process where the parole board is evaluating whether the person has been rehabilitated or not and whether they get to be released. In some cases, the governor has the opportunity to veto that, as he did in the particular case that we mentioned. But here's how the system works. Not only are we making our victim services available, and we added an additional 30 victim services to the work, but the CDCR, the California Department of Corrections, actually has a whole host of services that are used in order to assist victims go through the process. Often we're told that there are victims that want to participate in the process, but we're also told victims that do not want to participate in the process, they do not want to be re-victimized by seeing the things that cause the death of their loved one. But again, what we see from my opponent is someone that doesn't seem to understand the process.
But Mr. Gascon, in certain cases, should prosecutors attend parole hearings?
I don't believe that prosecutors have a role. I believe that we have a role assisting the victim going through the process, as CDCR does. The process is not about relitigating what originally occurred. We did that when we got the conviction. The process of the parole boards to provide the victim an opportunity to speak about the harm that was caused and whether they agree or not that this person should be released, their fears. But the parole board's job is actually to evaluate, based on the recommendations from the people in the prison system, whether they should be released or not. We know that this person committed a horrible event, and that's why they got prosecuted, and most of the time they're in prison for decades. The process, and by the way, parole is within the law, right? The assumption is that people will rehabilitate, and at some point they will be released, and about 95% of the people that go to prison do get released. The parole board's process is not one of relitigating the original case.
Mr. Hochman, I'll give you 30 seconds to respond to that.
Thank you. It's Mr. Gascon that doesn't understand the role of a prosecutor in the parole board hearing situation. Because the prosecutor, again, he seems to suggest that a prosecutor's duty stops at the end of a trial. Did the victim stop being victimized at the end of the trial? Of course not. That victim needs support throughout the entire process. So Mr. Gascon would have the prosecutor involved in the appeal, the habeas, the resentencing, but not the parole board hearing when the victim is confronting a murderer who is seeking to get out of prison early. That's exactly when the prosecutor needs to represent the victim before the parole board and share with them what went on in the trial and respond to any differences that might be occurring in the parole board hearing.
Your time is up. Thank you, sir. All right, Gabrielle, your question for Mr. Gascon.
Let's take it to the street. Street racing and takeovers, complex crimes that usually involve large groups of people organizing in social media. We have seen these groups become increasingly violent. You may remember back in January when a crowd at one of these sideshows ransacked a Mexican bakery in Compton, a business that has served the community for over 50 years with apparently no prior problems like this. Many of the people participating in these events are minors or young adults who may not have engaged in more serious crimes before. So how should they be dealt with by the district attorney's office? And more importantly, what can the DA's office do to crack down on these street takeovers?
Well, first of all, they don't get, if they get arrested, and again, we have to assume that there is an arrest, just because you're a juvenile does not mean that you get a free pass. Under the juvenile system, there are laws to deal with the problems, right? Sometimes, frankly, we have prosecuted cases where this has led to someone's death, right? But most of the time, thankfully, that's not the case. When the police makes an arrest and they're presented to us, if there are felony arrests in the parts where we have, felonies, we have jurisdiction over the county. If there are misdemeanors in the areas where we have misdemeanor jurisdiction, what we don't obviously is handled by city attorneys in different parts. But they do get held accountable, and they will continue to be held accountable. The other part, too, is how do we prevent this thing from occurring in the first place? So engaging in public education, working with community, working with the police to make sure that these crimes are being prevented in the first place. That is also things that we're responsible for, and we do. Again, just because you're a juvenile does not mean that you do not face consequences. The consequences should be appropriate to your age.
Mr. Hochman?
So I visited with Ruben Martinez, Jr. and Sr., who run the iconic Ruben's Bakery in Compton. Then on the early morning hours of January 2nd, had a 13-year-old ram a Kia into that grate. They estimate over 100 juveniles ran in, ransacked the place, and what have been the consequences? Well, for the 13-year-old, he actually got held responsible. For the 100 of kids who ran in, nothing. Because again, Mr. Gascon has a policy. It's right there in black and white. It says juveniles will not be prosecuted for misdemeanors. And by the way, the LA DA's office is the only one with jurisdiction over juveniles. And the LA DA's office has jurisdiction over 78 of the 88 cities because they don't have city attorney's offices. So Mr. Gascon's policies dealing with juveniles that have effectively said, go ahead and commit these misdemeanors. Misdemeanors involve street takeovers. Misdemeanors involve stealing just under $950. So that when the Martinezes are talking to me, they're saying, we got to do something about this, and it starts with getting rid of Mr. Gascon.
So what do you propose we do with those 13-year-old kids?
So again, we have to hold those 13-year-old kids responsible. And by the way, it was 13, probably up to 17. But here's how we hold them responsible. That is that hard middle approach. It does not go to mass incarceration. And shame on you, Mr. Gascon. How many times do I have to say I reject your extreme policy and mass incarceration? Because what hard middle policies are about or what prosecutors have done. Now, Mr. Gascon has never been a prosecutor, so he wouldn't understand what I'm talking about, and I have. But that hard middle approach says, look, if someone violates society's laws, they have to pay that debt back to society. And it might be community service would be the punishment. It might be restitution. Have those people, if they stole $100, pay that $100 back. It might be, again, a diversion program if they have a drug addiction, and that's while it's stealing. But again, you cannot go ahead and say to juveniles, nothing will happen. Because then you deal with a situation where parents are trying to teach their kids right from wrong, and the DA's office is sending a different message.
Okay. Before we go to break, I'll give you one more chance to address that.
Sure. Well, my opponent continues to mischaracterize not only the policies, but the law. Yes, we have full jurisdiction over juveniles around the county. It is also true that while we have misdemeanor jurisdiction over 78 cities, about 50% of the county population, about 5 million, have misdemeanor prosecutors simply because the larger cities have their own. Our policy, very clear, creates exceptions when it's necessary to prosecute. But even in the cases that are not prosecuted, it's not that the person gets out of jail without any, there's no free pass. They still have, as thankfully Mr. Hawken recognized, perhaps diversion is appropriate, education is appropriate. People get held accountable, but it's important also to go back and recognize that the way the system works, first of all, there has to be an arrest. In the case of juveniles, when the arrest occurs, they are given to the juvenile probation department. It is the juvenile probation department that makes a decision as to whether to bring the case to the prosecutors or not, but I understand that Mr. Hawken has never dealt with juvenile law, and he obviously doesn't understand it.
All right, gentlemen, thank you. We're going to take a quick break from this LA County DA Candidate Forum. We'll be back with more questioning right after this. Welcome back to the Los Angeles County District Attorney Candidate Forum. This event, co-hosted by ABC7 and the League of Women Voters of the Greater Los Angeles. We'll begin the questioning for the second half of the forum now. A question about homelessness. I want to ask about that. It's a public safety issue, as we know. The people living on our streets are extremely vulnerable. Often mental health issues are part of the problem as to their status and their behavior when they are homeless. If elected, what power does the DA's office have to help respond to the homelessness crisis and the mental health issues in Los Angeles County? We'll begin with Mr. Hoffman.
Yes. So the DA's office has to play a partner with social service organizations and nonprofits if we have any chance of dealing with the homeless epidemic in this county. And by a partner, one of the examples I can point to is the HOST team, H-O-S-T, the Homeless Outreach Services team, where you have trained law enforcement officers to deal with the homeless, working with the Los Angeles Homeless Service Authority, the Department of Mental Health, the Department of Public Works, the Department of Vocational Services. They go out to a homeless encampment and they enact a 5-point plan. Identify each person, assess their need, do outreach. Then after you have to, post a sign, a 14-day sign, and move them. Turns out that if you deal with the homeless compassionately and you find out why the root cause is of their homelessness, but you have law enforcement there as well, they've been able to move thousands of homeless people from encampments into appropriate services over the last several years and only had to arrest 2. So law enforcement has to be part of the solution. Mr. Gascon has taken law enforcement completely out of the picture.
Mr. Gascon on homelessness.
Yeah, again, my opponent actually doesn't know what we do, or he's selectively misstating the facts. We do work with many other partners. In fact, we work with the Board of Supervisors to make sure that we have increased the number of beds for people that are mentally ill. We also ensure that when people that are houseless and they commit a crime, they are held accountable to that crime. There's often violence within the camps, and actually most of the victims happen to be the unhoused as well. As a matter of fact, women that are unhoused are more likely than anyone else to be sexually assaulted. We not only work in order to ensure that those that are arrested by the police get prosecuted, but more importantly, we work to make sure that the victims are getting the services they need. Because it is true that while the prosecutor's job may end after you go through the entire prosecution cycle, including appellate work and all that, victim services never goes away. And that's one of the reasons why I added 30 additional victim services representatives to deal with our victims.
Josh, your question for Mr. Gascon.
DA Gascon, last week, a Metro bus was hijacked and a passenger was murdered. Violence on Metro trains and buses has been an ongoing issue. If elected, how would you help address this issue that is plaguing our public transit system?
Look, I mean, this is a horrible situation. As you will know, it's not the first one that has occurred. And we're prosecuting those cases when there is an arrest very aggressively, because we all depend on having a healthy public transport. The problems with our public transportation are many. There are obviously some problems, and there's different conversations about who should police the services, whether they should have their own policing or not. But what we do is we work closely with both law enforcement and the Metro system in order to make sure that when people are getting arrested, that they're being prosecuted appropriately. As a matter of fact, the case that you bring up is a case that we anticipate that will be presented to our office tomorrow. And based on the evidence, the case will be aggressively prosecuted as we have previous similar cases. But again, the complexities of this entire system require that people understand their roles, that they work together, and that we bring to bear all the services that we have in order to make sure that our public transport system is safe.
Mr. Hochman.
It's interesting that Mr. Gascon acknowledges that these situations are complex, yet he's used blanket policies to deal with so many aspects of crime. So if it's gang members that are actually participating in these crimes on the Metro, Mr. Gascon has this blanket policy not to treat it complexly or go ahead and use my hard middle approach of looking at all the factors, but just to say up front to those criminals, we're not prosecuting you for that. If it's juveniles who are getting on and committing misdemeanors on those buses, again, Mr. Gascon's message is not complex. It is very straightforward. You will not be prosecuted. So it's not a problem with law enforcement doing its job. Law enforcement very often does its job and brings those cases to the DA's office only to have them rejected. In fact, right now, there's over 10,000 unfiled cases where law enforcement has actually brought the case to the DA's office, but because of Mr. Gascon's system, those cases have not been reviewed.
Josh, you got a follow-up?
Yeah, but Mr. Hochman, we routinely hear that people don't feel safe on the Metro, and many don't have a choice. They have to take it. What would you do to secure our public transportation system?
So the message ultimately has to be sent to the criminals, the people who are actually hurting the people on the Metro. They have to understand that law enforcement will do its job, and that if we need more law enforcement, we will work, I will work, to make sure that law enforcement has the resources to get to the various parts of the Metro system, whether it's the subways, whether it's the buses, whether it's the Metro line. But then when those cases get brought to the DA's office, what I'll also ensure is that they get the appropriate look. There will be no blanket policy saying we're not going to prosecute certain crimes up front, because that is literally a message to law enforcement and the criminals that if you go ahead and commit these crimes, you will do so with impunity. So again, we can work with law enforcement to build up their ranks and then make sure when those cases come to the DA's office, these folks don't get arrested in the morning and under Mr. Gascon's policies released in the afternoon.
All right, Gabrielle, your question for Mr. Hochman.
Immigrants to this country are often an easy target for criminals. Let's talk about street vendors who already comply with licenses and permits, and then they're subject to extortion. We know it as derecho de piso. So it's basically organized criminals charging street vendors a space on public streets so they can sell without being attacked by them. We've heard plenty about how would you hold criminals accountable. But what happens to the street vendors? How can you help them?
Well, again, the street vendors in your situation are victims. That they are actually trying to comply with the law, trying to sell their merchandise, and now they're being victimized, usually by gangs, by the way, who are extorting them for actually peddling their wares in their territory. We have to go after the street gangs. And I would venture to say that most of that problem are street gangs. Now, how do you go after street gangs? You got to use all the tools in your arsenal. Part of those tools are the gang enhancement that Mr. Gascon will not enforce. But you also got to make sure that the street vendors know their rights. So I would go out with a massive education effort into the streets to make sure that they understand that if they are being extorted, there is a remedy for that extortion. Get to law enforcement, then get to the DA's office, because if I'm the DA, we'll actually get something done.
Mr. Gascon?
Yeah, you know, again, we go back to misstating the facts. You know, I think this is the Haitian eating pets same approach here. The issue of blanket policies, my opponent knows that we have a review process, that we go through these cases, and when appropriate, we do allege enhancements. But, you know, there is so much code word here about the hard right, about, you know, going back to the death penalty, going back to the times when 16-year-olds will go to adult prison for getting a fight in a school and going to prison. We work not only with the people that are involved in street vending, but for the first time in the history of the office, we created a policy to ensure that those that are immigrants and are here are having their immigration status be attended to in order to ensure that they're getting all the services that they need, and we will continue to do so. I am one that actually has worked very closely with the immigrant community for years, and we have policies that have really spoken to the needs of our immigrant community, including street vendors who are very supportive of our work.
Josh, your question for Mr. Gascon.
Yes, DA Gascon, our reporters at Eyewitness News, including myself, have covered many home burglaries recently, including in the San Fernando Valley and places like Encino. In some cases, the criminals behind these break-ins are from another country, traveling here specifically to commit crimes, crime tourism. Homeowners tell us they are scared. Some say they want to leave LA County, some are considering buying firearms, others are spending thousands of dollars on home security. As District Attorney, how will you address these home burglaries, and what is your message to these concerned residents?
Well, look, first of all, my heart goes out for anyone that has been victimized, right? We know that a lot of this has occurred in the city of LA, and we actually know that home burglaries in the city of LA are down year to date. But that is not the answer for someone that had burglaries that occurred to their home. We have prosecuted about 90% of all the cases that law enforcement has brought to our attention concerning these home burglaries. As a matter of fact, we have filed in the last few months about 500 cases, and we go at them very aggressively. And the sentencing involves anywhere from, depending on the culpability, from low term to significant period of time in state prison. And we will continue to do so. But the work has been one of working hand in hand with law enforcement, helping with search warrants, helping with identifying when we have multi-jurisdictional crimes, because we also have a crime analysis unit that was not there before that actually often help us connect the dots in order to make sure that we are as effective as we can be. One of the largest problems with residential burglaries is that it is very hard for the law enforcement officers to catch the suspects because they move in and out very quickly.
All right. Mr. Hochman?
Yes. About a month ago, Mr. Gascon announced a new initiative to deal with residential burglaries. I was very eager to read it. Here's what his new initiative was: a hotline number. So I actually called it. Turns out it says, if it's an emergency, dial 911, otherwise leave a message at the sound of the tone. That is the quality of the initiative of Mr. Gascon to deal with this huge spate and increasing amount of residential burglaries in our society. Here's what I would do differently. As I have been a prosecutor for 10 years, I've been a defense counsel for 24 years, and I have led task forces. So I would bring a federal, state, local task force because, yes, you have to deal with the Chileans and the Venezuelans who are coming into this country. That's federal jurisdiction. Then you have to deal with both state and local in order to actually get your hands around often the gangs that are perpetrating these crimes. Because as Mr. Gascon actually knows, the spate of robberies we've seen recently in Sherman Oaks, in Encino, in Westchester, in San Pedro, these are gang type of cases. So I would use all the tools at my disposal and lead that federal, state, and local task force to deal with this problem.
Gabriela, your question for Mr. Hoffman.
There's a zero bail policy now in effect in Los Angeles County. So most people arrested on suspicion of nonviolent and non-serious offenses will be cited, released, with orders to appear in court for arraignment later once they are charged. So there's serious concerns that this policy will send the wrong message to criminals. In your view, what is the long-term impact of the zero bail policy?
Those serious concerns are absolutely real. Because if you basically tell a criminal that even if you get arrested, you're going to be arrested in the morning and out by the afternoon, it's such a little disincentive for the criminal to stop committing criminal activity that they're going to continue. In fact, if I'm the district attorney, the #1 priority I would have is to deter criminal conduct. Not mass incarceration, Mr. Gascon, because that is the failure of a criminal justice system. The true effectiveness of a criminal justice system is to deter the criminals from committing the crimes in the first place. And bail is part of that equation. We need to adopt a risk-based analysis where we bring a magistrate judge in early in the process and we assess whether or not there's a risk that they're going to commit more crimes or they're going to show up. The higher the risk, the higher the bail. But even though bail is a constitutional right here in the state of California, that bail has to be appropriate both for the defendant and the risks.
Mr. Gascon.
Again, you know, I'm amazed by my opponent's failure to understand the law. So the bail policy is a court policy, and it's based on state law. And basically, when someone has committed a nonviolent offense, if there is no opposition by law enforcement to seek, for instance, a deviation from the bail schedule will be to release. If you commit serious and violent offenses, bail is still very much alive. By the way, we know that bail, monetary bail, is ineffective. I agree with my opponent in that it should be risk-based. But here's what we have done in order to address the court's policy concerning non-serious and non-violent cases. We have actually worked with them to make sure that when police officers want to have a bail deviation, we will work with them to make sure that bail deviation is impacted, and for those that are repeat offenders, that they are held on bail or their additional conditions are placed. Interestingly enough, when you look at the court data, since this policy has been in place, the return to court actually increased than when they use money bail for those cases.
Josh, your question for Mr. Gascon.
Yes, we hear a lot about criminal justice reform and the stemming of mass incarceration. So let's get some specifics. How can you achieve this while not making LA County less safe? Why are you better suited than your opponent to successfully reform the system?
Look, balanced reform is something that I am very committed to, because we cannot continue to do business as we always had and expect a different result. In fact, a lot of the unsafe conditions that we have today are the product of years of mass incarceration. I understand that, you know, my opponent continues to talk about a hard middle, but that really sounds so much like coded word to go back to the days of mass incarceration. I believe that following data, following science, holding people accountable. When people are dangerous, they should be prosecuted and they should be separated from the rest of our community. When people are having other problems like mental health and they haven't caused harm to anyone else, we need to ensure also that we treat them accordingly. We need to treat kids like kids. We know that kids do not do well in adult prisons. We need to ensure that we do not go back to the mistake that we have made for generations, where we over-incarcerate communities of color and actually create more insecurity for our community.
Mr. Hochman.
So if I'm the district attorney, I'll be the first district attorney ever who's been a prosecutor and a defense attorney. I'll be the first district attorney who's ever actually personally prosecuted a deputy sheriff. I did it with a team that went after 16 deputy sheriffs who were stealing drugs, guns, and money from drug dealers. We convicted them all. But I'm also the co-founder of the LA Sheriff's Foundation and have got them necessary resources that they have needed over the last several years. So I can institute real and effective criminal justice reform in a way that Mr. Gascon only talks about. Let's take police accountability. When Mr. Gascon came in, he said he was going to review all the cases that his predecessor, these are cases involving police officers who shot unarmed black men, that Ms. Lacey did not prosecute, and he was going to review the dozens of cases. He hired a special prosecutor at $750,000 a year. And in the last 3.5 years, that prosecutor has brought one case, and that case is caught up in the courts.
Gabriela, your question for Mr. Hochman.
Let's talk about non-citizens and a district attorney's role in immigration law, which includes, of course, protecting non-citizens. You spoke a little bit about it. Now, the question for Mr. Hochman first is prosecutors can certify those victims of crimes for a U visa. That U visa is a certification signed by law enforcement, states that the person was a victim of a qualifying crime and is helpful in the investigation or prosecution of that particular crime. However, prosecutors now have the discretion to certify or not. So would you create an internal policy to direct your prosecutors to have an active role and support immigrants, victims of a crime, so they can get a U visa?
Yes. And the reason I can say yes so quickly is that because if someone is a victim of a crime, in fact, very often it is immigrants who are victims of crimes because they don't believe they can go to the criminal justice system. They're very concerned about their own status, and therefore they routinely get victimized. Whether it's labor wage theft, very often happens, extortion that we talked about earlier, or various other crimes where they are the targets. So you actually have to have prosecutors working with law enforcement, that when these victims are identified, that we protect the victims. We help bring the criminals to justice. And it will only be done if prosecutors work with law enforcement to accomplish that.
Mr. Gascon.
You know, this is an area that is not what I would have done, because we actually created a model policy in how to deal with immigration. We did so with the community. One of the problems that I saw when I first came into the office that often we did not attend to immigration consequences, both for victims, witnesses, as well as the defendant, and we created what is now considered a model policy. In fact, parts of our policy became state law. We work closely with victims, witnesses' family to make sure that when they qualify, not only for a U visa, but sometimes also for a T visa, which has to do with human trafficking, that they are not only certified, but they're provided assistance in order to obtain that relief. We also recognize that often victims, especially those that are here without documentation, are going to be very hesitant to come to law enforcement or to the prosecutor's office. And to that end, we extend victim services to make sure that people understand that their immigration status is irrelevant to our work and that we're here to help them.
Josh, your question for Mr. Gascon.
Yeah, this question is about the death penalty. Do you support having the option to request a death sentence? And do you feel California should lift its moratorium on executions?
The answer to that is no, and let me tell you why. Not only do we know that the death penalty is not a deterrent, we know that it's being used in very discriminatory ways, but we also know that it's irreversible. And I'm going to give you an example. We have a gentleman that came through our exoneration process. He was sent to prison for murder and rape. The office tried to get the death penalty on him twice, failed because the jury refused to do so. The office refused to test his DNA. When I became the DA, we tested the DNA, and not only did we find that he was innocent, but we found the real perpetrator of this. Had we not done that, Mr. Hastings would have been executed. We know that there are innocent people that have been executed in this nation. We know that there is a need to get rid of the death penalty. I applaud the governor for doing so. We have taken now 36 people off of death row. We do not allege the death penalty. About a half of the states in the union no longer have the death penalty. And the death penalty fell in LA County when it was put out to the voters. And I look forward to the day that we will not have the death penalty in the books.
Mr. Hochman, 1 minute.
Yes. So I recognize that there are strong views on both sides of the death penalty. But if I'm the district attorney, I will raise my hand and say I'm going to uphold all the laws of the state of California. No asterisk, no crossing my fingers, and no choosing just the laws I like. Twice in the last 15 years, the death penalty has been brought before the voters to eliminate it, and twice they have kept the death penalty. So I believe it only should be used in the most rare situations where it applies. If someone goes ahead and kills 22 kindergartners, like we had at Sandy Hook, or we have the Vegas situation and someone kills 56 people, or someone puts a bomb in SoFi Stadium and kills thousands. That is a situation where the death penalty needs to be put on the table for consideration, and it gets the highest level of scrutiny by the DA's office. Literally, it goes through all the layers in the DA's office, a judge, a jury, goes through the entire California appellate process, the federal process, back to the California appellate process, over to the governor. So in those rare situations, I will uphold my law, and it'll be part of the consideration.
All right, time is tight now. Each of you has been given 1 minute to give a closing statement about why you should be elected LADA. We had a coin flip. Mr. Hochman, you won. You get 1 minute right now.
Why am I running for DA? The answer is straightforward. I am running for my family and all the families who are fed up of living in a community with rampant crime. They say enough is enough, and they want a DA to do his job and enforce the law in a smart, proportional, and effective way. I am running for parents who are trying to teach their kids that actions like stealing have consequences. I am running for store owners who watch helplessly as thieves routinely steal from their stores. I'm running for victims and victim families who want to have the DA be a champion for them again. I'm running for all those who want real and effective criminal justice reform from someone who has actually been in the courts, unlike my opponent. I'm running for all the prosecutors and law enforcement officers out there who want a DA who will listen, who will learn, and be their partner. As a lifelong Angelino, I am going to fight for what I love. I ask you to join me.
Mr. Gascon, 1 minute.
You know, as I mentioned previously, you have now heard two very different visions for the future of our community. One, that of my opponent, that of someone that doesn't fully understand state law in many cases, or the complexities of the world and the work. Full of half-truth, lies, and Trumpish fear-mongering slogans. His vision seeks to take us back to the failed tough-on-crime policies I witnessed firsthand when I was a police officer. And mine, that of a career public safety servant based on both hope and a passion for fairness and equity, and a firm commitment to protecting all of our communities, some that I have been doing for the past 4 years and will continue to do so if I am honored with getting reelected. It has been truly an honor for me to have this opportunity to address you, and I look forward to continuing our dialogue.
All right, gentlemen, thank you very much, and thank you. That concludes our forum for this evening. We would like to thank our co-sponsors, the League of Women Voters of Greater Los Angeles, and our media partner, Univision LA. Finally, we invite you to visit abc7.com/vote for more information on the upcoming election on November 5th. The deadline to return your vote-by-mail ballot is November 5th, and you can vote in person at any vote center in Los Angeles County beginning on October 26th. Voters will begin receiving mail-in ballots around October 7th. We hope you exercise your right to vote. Thank you for joining us. Good night.